I didn't make a scene. I didn't raise my voice. I just sat across the table from my sister and smiled, and she had absolutely no idea that I had spent the last 4 months making sure that moment would be the last time she ever tried to use me. Let me back up. I'm 31 years old. I work in compliance for a mid-sized financial services firm in Columbus, Ohio. My job is to find irregularities, patterns that don't fit, numbers that have been moved in ways that are just slight too convenient. I'm good at it. I've been doing it for 6 years, and I can spot a fabricated paper trail the way most people spot a typo. My sister is 2 years older than me. Her name is Fiona, and for most of my adult life, I told myself that what she did wasn't really stealing. It was borrowing. It was family. It was complicated. I was wrong. It was stealing. And I didn't see it clearly until the morning I opened my credit report and found a Discover card I had never applied for, with a balance of $11,000 and a payment that was 4 months past due. I want to tell you exactly what happened that morning because I think the order of things matters. It was a Tuesday in March. I had just made coffee. I was sitting at my kitchen table in my robe, still half asleep, and I had pulled up my credit monitoring app because I do that the first Tuesday of every month. It's a habit from work. I know how fast these things can spiral if you don't catch them early. The alert was already there. New Discover Financial.
Opened.
I set my coffee down. I didn't panic. Panic isn't useful. I went to annualcreditreport.com and pulled all 3 bureaus, Equifax, Experian, TransUnion, and I sat there at my kitchen table in my robe for the next 2 hours going through every single line. There were 2 accounts I hadn't opened, the Discover card, and a personal loan through a credit union in Cincinnati for $8,000, opened almost 2 years prior, also past due. Together, that was nearly $20,000 in debt that was sitting on my credit report under my Social Security number. My hands were completely still when I picked up my coffee again. That's the thing people don't understand about finding out you've been defrauded. You don't shake. You go very, very quiet. Because some part of your brain has already started working the problem, and it doesn't have time for emotion yet. I thought about who had access to my information. I keep my Social Security card in a lockbox. I don't carry it in my wallet. I've never given that number to anyone who didn't need it professionally. But there was one exception, and I had filed it away in the back of my mind because filing things away is easier than dealing with them. 4 years ago, my sister had asked to borrow my laptop for a weekend while hers was being repaired. I hadn't thought anything of it. She gave it back Monday morning, thanked me, bought me a coffee as a thank you. We were fine, except I remembered suddenly, very clearly, that I had my tax returns saved in a folder on that desktop, including my W-2s, including my social security number. I sat there with my coffee and I thought, Fiona. And then I thought, I need to be sure before I do anything. This is what I do for a living. I don't accuse, I gather. The credit union in Cincinnati, I called them that morning. I told them I was calling about a loan that appeared on my credit report that I had not authorized. They asked me to verify my identity, which I did, and then they told me the loan application had been submitted online. They couldn't give me an address or IP information over the phone, but they told me the name on the application. My name, obviously, and the address associated with the account. It was not my address. It was an address in Dayton, Ohio. Fiona lived in Dayton. I hung up and I sat with that for a moment. And then I started a document on my laptop titled Personal Matter. And I began making notes with timestamps. I did not call Fiona. I did not call my parents. I did not post anything on social media. I did not tell a single person what I had found. Instead, I called a consumer law attorney that afternoon and made an appointment for Thursday. I filed fraud alerts with all 3 credit bureaus. I contacted Discover's fraud department and the credit union's fraud department and opened official disputes. I requested paper copies of every document associated with both accounts, applications, transaction histories, copies of any identifications submitted. The documents arrived over the following 3 weeks. The Discover card application had been submitted using my name, my social security number, and my mother's home address in Cincinnati, where I had lived until I was 22. The photo ID submitted with the application was a scan of an old driver's license, mine, from before I renewed it. The signature on the application was close to mine but not exact, a little loopier, a little more rushed. The personal loan application had been submitted with the same information. I went to my attorney's office with a folder. She went through everything. She told me that what I had was strong enough for a police report, strong enough for civil action. She also told me something I already knew but needed to hear from someone else. I needed to file a police report before I confronted anyone because confrontation has a way of making evidence disappear. I filed the police report on a Friday afternoon. The officer I spoke to was patient. He took notes. He told me these cases were more common than people realized, and that family-perpetrated identity fraud was among the hardest to prosecute because victims often declined to press charges. He said that without my cooperation, there wasn't much the system could do. I told him I intended to fully cooperate. He looked at me for a moment like he was deciding whether I meant it. I meant it. Here is what I want you to understand about my relationship with my sister before I tell you what happened next. We weren't enemies. We weren't estranged. We talked every week or two. She called me on my birthday. She sent me a plant when I got my promotion. We had Sunday dinners at my parents' house in Cincinnati every couple of months, and we sat across from each other and talked about her job and my job and what was happening in the neighborhood and what my mom had been watching on TV. She had been stealing from me for at least 2 years during all of that, smiling at me across my mother's dining room table while a fraudulent loan in my name was falling further into default. I keep coming back to that. The dinners, the plant she sent me, the way she'd text me funny videos sometimes, late at night, just because she thought I'd laugh. I don't know how to reconcile that person with what she did. I've stopped trying. After the police report, I went home and I called my parents. Not to tell them everything, not yet. Just to tell them I needed to speak with them and Fiona together, and I'd like to do it the following Saturday at their house, and it was important. My mom asked if everything was okay. I told her it would be. My dad asked if I was in some kind of trouble. I said no, I wasn't the one in trouble. He didn't follow up on that. I noticed. The week before that Saturday, I did 3 things. First, I met again with my attorney. We went through my legal options and what documentation I would need to preserve. She walked me through what civil fraud litigation might look like, what a settlement might look like, what criminal referral might look like. I told her I wasn't there to negotiate. She nodded and told me to document everything. Second, I printed copies of both account applications, the transaction histories, the timeline I had built, and the police report number. I put them in a manila envelope, and I did not tell anyone I had done this. Third, I made an appointment to have my locks rekeyed, not because I thought Fiona would break in, but because having a physical action to take made me feel less like I was just waiting. I did not sleep well that week. I want to be honest about that. I lay awake some nights going through scenarios. What if she denied it? What if my parents didn't believe me? What if they told me I was tearing the family apart? What if they cried? I made peace with most of those scenarios. I had documented everything. The facts were not going to change based on who cried. Saturday morning, I drove to Cincinnati. The drive is about an hour and 45 minutes. I listened to a podcast about the history of American labor law. I did not think about what I was about to do. I had already done all the thinking I needed to do. My parents' house is a 2-story colonial on a cul-de-sac that I grew up in. My mom had made baked ziti. It was sitting in the oven when I arrived. Fiona was already there, at the kitchen table with a glass of iced tea, and she stood up and hugged me when I walked in, and I hugged her back. I am still not sure how I did that. But I did. We ate lunch first. That was deliberate on my part. I had decided that if there was going to be a difficult conversation, we were all going to be sitting down and fed and in the living room, not standing in the kitchen while something burned in the oven. I wanted the environment to be as calm as possible, not for their comfort, for mine. After lunch, we moved to the living room. My mom sat in her chair, my dad took the couch, Fiona sat next to him. I sat across from all three of them, and I put the manila envelope on the coffee table. My mom said, "You're making me nervous." I said, "I know. I'm sorry. I need to show you all something." I opened the envelope. I put the credit report on the table first. I walked them through the two accounts, the Discover card, the personal loan. I was calm. I used the same voice I use in compliance meetings. Matter of fact, not cold, just clear. My mom's face went white. My dad leaned forward. Fiona looked at the papers and then looked at me, and for a moment her expression did something complicated, something that looked almost like relief, actually, like a person who has been holding their breath for a long time and has finally been told they can stop. I noticed that. I put the applications on the table next. I pointed to the address. I pointed to the signature. I didn't say anything dramatic. I just let the documents be what they were. Fiona said, "I can explain." My mom looked at her. My dad looked at her. I said, "Okay." What followed was about 40 minutes that I am still honestly processing, Fiona cried. She told us that 4 years ago she had gotten into a situation, a bad relationship, a controlling partner who had run up debt in her name, who had taken money from her, who had left her in a financial hole she didn't know how to climb out of. She told us she had been ashamed. She told us she hadn't wanted to ask for help. She told us she had only meant to use my information for one thing, just to get through one hard month, and then it had spiraled and she hadn't known how to stop. My parents cried. My mom kept saying, "Oh, sweetheart," to Fiona. My dad put his hand on Fiona's back. I sat across from all of them, and I listened to all of it, and I felt something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite sadness. It was something more like clarity, like watching a pattern emerge from noise. She had not told my parents about her financial situation. She had not told me. She had not asked either of us for help. Instead, she had taken my social security number off a document on my laptop and used it to apply for credit in my name. And she had let those accounts default, and 2 years while my credit dinners for 2 years, while my credit score took the hit. When she finished, she looked at me and said, "I'm so sorry, I know this is bad. I know I need to fix it." My dad looked at me. He said, "She's your sister. She was in a crisis. You can work something out, right? We can figure out a payment plan, get this resolved quietly, keep it in the family." There it was. I had been waiting for that phrase. Keep it in the family. I said, "I filed a police report 3 weeks ago." The room went very still. My dad said, "You what?" I said, "I filed a police report. I've also retained an attorney. I've submitted fraud disputes to both creditors and to all 3 credit bureaus. I have copies of the applications with the date and address and the signature discrepancy. I have a documented timeline going back to when Fiona borrowed my laptop 4 years ago." My mom said, "Honey, you can't. She's your sister." I said, "I know she's my sister. She used my social security number to open fraudulent accounts and let them default. That's a federal crime. Being my sister doesn't change what the law is." My dad's voice got harder. He said, "You're going to destroy this family over money." I said, "I'm not destroying anything. Fiona made choices. I'm responding to them. The family's condition is a consequence of her choices, not mine." He didn't have an answer to that. Fiona was crying again. She said, "Please, please don't do this. I'll pay you back. I'll figure it out." I said, "Fiona, the police report is already filed. I can't unfile it. And honestly, even if I could, I wouldn't, because this has to stop." She looked at me. She said, "What do you mean, stop? I only did this to you." I said, "Are you sure about that?" She blinked. I said, "I pulled your credit report too. Your debt-to-income situation is significant. I'm not going to get into what I found, but I want you to think very carefully before you tell me this was an isolated incident." That was a calculated thing to say. I didn't have her credit report. I had no legal basis to pull it. But I know what loan applications look like. I know what patterns look like. And I know how to ask a question that makes someone wonder what you already know. Fiona looked at her hands. My mom said, She was in a terrible situation. You don't understand what she went through with that man. I said, I believe her about the relationship. I'm sure it was awful. That doesn't make identity fraud a reasonable response, and it doesn't make it my responsibility to absorb the consequences. My dad tried one more time. He said, if you pursue this, you're going to put your own sister in prison. You understand that? You're going to sit there and watch them put handcuffs on your sister. I said, that's not my decision. That's the DA's decision, based on the evidence. My decision was whether to file a report documenting that I was defrauded. I made that decision. Quiet again. Then my mom said something I have thought about almost every day since. She said, I don't understand how you can be so cold. I said, I'm not cold. I'm protecting myself. There's a difference, and it took me a long time to learn it. Nobody said anything after that. I picked up the copies of my documents. I left the originals on the table. I stood up and I put on my coat and I said goodbye. My mom didn't get up. My dad didn't look at me. Fiona was staring at her hands. I drove home. I listened to the second half of the podcast about American labor law. I stopped at a Panera in Dayton for a cup of soup because I hadn't eaten much at lunch. Over the following weeks, things move the way these things move when there is documentation and a cooperative victim. The fraud disputes were resolved in my favor. The negative marks were removed from my credit report. My attorney drafted a civil demand letter to Fiona for the amount of the damages, including my legal fees. I received a call from a detective who told me the case had been referred to the county prosecutor's office. I won't tell you what happened with the prosecution, because that part is still working itself out in ways that involve lawyers on multiple sides, and I've been advised to keep it private. What I can tell you is that I cooperated fully with every step of the process, and I have no regrets about that. My parents have not called me since that Saturday. Fiona called me once, about 3 weeks later. She left a voicemail. She said she was sorry. She said she was getting help. She said she hoped someday I would understand. I listened to it twice. Then I saved it to a folder labeled Personal Matter next to the timeline and the police report number and the copies of the applications. I don't know if I will ever talk to Fiona again. I don't know if I want to. I know that sounds harsh, and I know there are people who will read this and think I should have handled it differently. Kept it quiet, made a payment plan, given her a chance to fix it privately. Some of those people will feel strongly about it. I understand that instinct. I had that instinct for most of my 20s. I kept quiet about smaller things she did, borrowed money she never paid back, showed up to my apartment, and helped herself to things without asking, called me at 11 on a Tuesday to talk about her problems, and then forgot my birthday 2 weeks later. I kept filing those things away. Here is what I know now. Filing things away is not the same as forgiving them. It just means you're carrying them somewhere less visible. And at some point, the weight is the same either way. The morning after I got confirmation that the fraud disputes had been resolved, I pulled up my credit report again. First Tuesday of the month. Habit. My score had come back up, not all the way. It will take another year or so to fully recover. But it was moving in the right direction. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table. Outside, it was starting to get warm the way Ohio gets warm in late spring, that green-gold light that lasts about 2 weeks before it gets humid. I sat there with my coffee and I thought about the fact that I had spent 2 years quietly absorbing the consequences of something I hadn't done, and that I had spent 4 months quietly undoing it, and that nobody in my family had asked me once, during either of those periods, how I was doing. And then I finished my coffee, and I got dressed, and I went to work. There's a word I keep coming back to, and it's not justice, though I understand why people reach for that one. It's not revenge either, because I didn't do anything to Fiona. I just declined to protect her from the results of her own choices. The word I keep coming back to is accurate. Everything that happened, I made sure was accurate. The documents, the report, the timeline, the disputes. All of it was an accurate record of what had actually occurred. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't perform. I didn't make it bigger than it was. She did something. There is now an accurate record that she did it. That's all I wanted. For the record to reflect what actually happened. Some people think that's cold. I think it's the most honest thing I've ever done.